In this presentation, you're going to be given some tips for success for online classes. Given that online learning poses some specific challenges that often are not seen in on-campus classes, the tips that are provided in this presentation mostly relate to success in online classes. Of course, there are some tips for how to succeed in college in general. Perhaps the most important is that one needs to study in order to do well. Taking shortcuts when trying to learn information often leads to reduced scores on tests, homework, and other elements of the class. So obviously one needs to put in the amount of time necessary in order to learn the material. First, a few tips will be given for how to best complete assignments. One of the most important things that you can do in an online class is read the instructions for the assignment as thoroughly as possible. This is because you are not given oral instructions from an instructor in an on-campus class. Instead, you need to be self-reliant and read through the assignment yourself to make sure that you don't miss any important points. This should be done early, of course, because if you do have any questions, you should immediately contact the instructor, as it may take a day or so for you to get a proper response. Another exceptionally important point when it comes to doing your studying and completing assignments has to do with the fact that you need to limit distractions to you. When you are in an on-campus class and a professor is lecturing or you are doing some in-class work, there are very few distractions for you. However, most of the learning that you're going to do in the online classes is done on your own, which usually requires you to sit down for a period of time and read online lectures and or read the textbook that's assigned for the class. The problem is that there are many things that can distract you, especially if you're online. You can get emails, you can get instant messages, you can have your cell phone ring, you can be listening to music, you can be watching videos online, etc. All of these things are distractions, and don't be fooled into thinking that you have this incredible ability to multitask. What multitasking means is that you do a lot of things at the same time poorly, as opposed to doing one thing at a time very well. So when you are studying for your online class, do just that. Study for your online class. Do not be distracted by all of the outside influences that will take away from your attention. When you're taking an online class, the exposure that people have to you is basically solely through writing. You send emails, you post to discussions, you turn in homework, all of which are in a written format. How you communicate with others leaves an impression. When you're communicating orally in front of an instructor, you can get your point across fairly easily, and if the instructor doesn't understand what you're saying, then he or she can ask you to clarify. When you're taking a class in an online environment, there are certain challenges that must be overcome when you are communicating. And so the more effectively you can communicate, the better off you'll be. One important point is to try and use proper grammar as best as possible. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to have somebody check over your email messages to your instructors, but you should look over it to make sure that there is somewhat proper grammar, that you capitalize letters like the word I, and that you try and do some spell checking that's involved. Remember, as you are communicating via email, you are projecting an image of yourself. If you provide an email to an instructor that asks questions with incomplete sentences or uncapitalized words or other problems, it is showing a certain level of commitment, actually lack of commitment, on your part to effective communication. And you don't want to do that. You want to communicate effectively. Another benefit of using proper grammar, especially when you are emailing your instructor, is that this gets you into good practice for when you might apply for a job that requires good communication skills in the future or for other important tasks. Today it has become almost standard to use all kinds of abbreviations and all kinds of shortcuts when communicating via email, especially with the rise of text messaging. Nonetheless, you should try to avoid these as best as possible, especially when communicating with your instructor. The problem is that if you get into the habit of communicating using these shortcuts, when it comes time to turn in homework or other assignments, you are less prone to check for grammar, and in those instances, turning in assignments without using proper grammar is not entirely appropriate. When it comes to discussions and other forms of communication with other students, it might be okay to fall back on some text messaging like grammar usage. However, again, you want to get into the practice of using proper grammar for all instances. Related to this point is the need to effectively communicate what you need to communicate. So if you are asking the professor a question relating to clarification of an assignment, you need to be sure that you give the professor enough information so he or she knows what you're actually asking. The problem is that you can have a turnaround of a couple of days. So if you ask a question and then the professor gets back to you a day later but doesn't exactly know what you're asking, then it might take you another day to get back to the professor and then for the professor to get back to you. By this time, the assignment passed. So if you are able to get the right information to the instructor in the first place, that's going to be a big benefit for you. One of the challenges with online communication is that you can't really provide emotional content behind the written message. And so you need to be very careful of the kinds of things that you put into your email so that communication is not taken the wrong way. Very often, students will ask questions in a manner that seems to be a direct challenge to a professor. And nobody likes to be challenged like that, not professors, not students. So you need to be aware of how exactly you're phrasing questions or how exactly you're phrasing statements, because people don't know the tone that you're using behind the email. Things can be said in a variety of different ways, and you want to make sure that it's not misinterpreted as being said with an angry tone. One other thing to be careful of stems from the somewhat anonymous nature of email communication or online communication. Many instructors report that when they talk to students on campus, students talk in a very respectful manner. However, because email has a level of separation between the sender and the receiver, students often feel emboldened and will often be very critical of instructors. And instructors will report that students can be very, very harsh sometimes. That kind of tone does not go over very well with instructors or anybody, and so you need to be cautious when sending emails. Yes, of course it's appropriate to ask instructors the basis for a grade or to explain why an assignment was given a particular score. However, it is not appropriate to challenge anyone in an inappropriate manner, even if it is through email communication. So these are some things that you need to be aware of when you are communicating in online classes. A final tip to be made relating to online classes has to do with backing up your material. You need to make sure that you are protected in the event of a problem. And there are a couple of things that you can do. First of all, if you are turning in an assignment, a thing that is very, very helpful to do would be to send a copy of the assignment to yourself. So if you send the assignment to the professor, CC or carbon copy yourself, so that way you have proof that the assignment was actually turned in on time. Sometimes emails don't get through, sometimes professors overlook an email by accident, sometimes mail filters will filter out your message even though it's not supposed to be filtered out. So this way you are protecting yourself from a problem. Another thing that you should do is you should back up copies of your work. So if you have to do a homework assignment, for example, don't just open up your email application and type out the answers of the assignment right in the body of the email and then send it off to the professor. Instead, open up a document in a program such as Microsoft Word, type out your homework answers, save that document, and then copy and paste the material to the professor in the email assignment. This way you will protect yourself in case the information is lost via communication. Of course, another benefit of doing things this way is that if you write in a separate document, you'll be able to read over it and spell check it and make sure that there's proper grammar much easier than if you were just doing it through an email program. You should save all copies of your work just in case something happens. And you can do this on your computer. Of course, if your computer hard drive fails, then you're in trouble. So you might also want to save it on some kind of external device, such as a small disk drive, or even today they have online storage where you can back up your material. This way you will be protected in the event of some kind of data loss. Armed with this series of tips, you are now in a great position to be able to successfully complete your online class. Good luck.